Ashworth accepted that for many MPs, the measures in the bill went against the grain.
Today, this House is being asked to make decisions of a magnitude I simply would never have dreamt of only a few weeks ago. And I know no member came into this place to put powers like this onto the statute book, powers that curtail so many basic freedoms that our forebears fought so hard for.
Labour's Siobhan McDonough highlighted a real difficulty that some families would face if they were told to stay at home for long periods.
If you happen to live with your family in one room in a shared house, as so many of my constituents do, sharing kitchens, sharing bathrooms, deeply overcrowded, this is a really difficult thing, particularly when the kids are off school. So there needs to be some thought about letting them out in parks and stuff like that because they don't have gardens.
Jonathan Ashworth said serious lessons would have to be learned once the outbreak was over.
The crisis has exposed the vulnerability of a society in which insecure work is rife, deregulation is king, and public services are underfunded. When we come out on the other side, as we will, we have to build a society that puts people first.
The leader of the SNP at Westminster, Ian Blackford, said everyone had their part to play in fighting the spread of the virus.
No one knows for sure when this will end. But we do know that NHS and governmental action won't be enough on its own. Everyone has a part to play. We can only get through this and we can only overcome it when we all work together.
The former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, criticised people who'd gone to the park or the beach at the weekend as though nothing had changed.
It is time not just to ask people to do social distancing, but to enforce those social distancing rules. Not next week, not this week, but right away.
And a little later, Boris Johnson told people to stay at home and banned gatherings of more than 2 people in public. Many of the measures in the 329-page bill are designed to reduce the pressure on frontline services. A Liberal Democrat, Memoria Wilson, was worried about one aspect of those plans, the proposal to relax the duties on local authorities to provide social care to elderly and vulnerable adults.
Could see care standards lowered to a dangerously low level, putting these people at risk. Could the Secretary of State outline what will be the thresholds for turning these powers on and indeed back off again to ensure that these do not become the new norm?
Members of the House of Lords will debate the emergency legislation later today. MPs will question the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, and they're expected to question him about help for self-employed people.
Sean Curran reporting there. You can hear more from yesterday in Parliament at 8:30 on digital and long wave. It is now coming up to 12 minutes to 7. Shops selling non-essential goods must close. That was one of the Prime Minister's announcements last night. But what is and what is not essential? Sports Direct say they're keeping their stores open as they sell the equipment needed, they say, for people to exercise at home. Let's talk now to Helen Dickinson, who's the Chief Executive of the British Retail Consortium. Morning to you.
Morning, Nick.
Do you think it's clear who should and shouldn't be open? And by anyone's definition, is Sports Direct really essential?
Well, the guidance was only out late last night. It's on the government's website and it includes supermarkets, non-food, pharmacies, petrol stations, bicycle shops, home and hardware, laundrettes, car rentals, pet shops, corner shops, news agents, post offices and banks. So that's what it says.
Not sports shops.
It's really clear. I think what they've endeavoured to do is to look at what is essential for us all in these unprecedented times. And certainly every retailer that I've spoken to has wanted to make sure that the safety of their customers and of their staff is absolutely paramount.
So not Sports Direct. They would not be included on that list in your view?
Well, online, all of online remains open. As I said, the guidance is on the government website.
Okay.
It doesn't mention that. No.
Let's talk about the pressure that this will put, even more pressure on supermarkets. We're hearing reports that Morrisons are now going to have to install perspex screens to protect their staff on the tills from customers. Are the supermarkets now really worried about security in store?
Well, everybody that remains open under this revised guidance will absolutely follow the latest government guidelines on what's required to ensure that safety that is absolutely paramount. That guidance says keep a safe distance of 2 metres. If that requires small groups only entering stores, then that's what the business needs to do in order to remain open.
Understood. What about security, Helen? Do you think it'll be necessary to ramp up security? Could we even see police on the floors of our supermarkets?
Many businesses have already enhanced their security in order to help the situation. I think really my message this morning is that all of us have a vital role to play. We need to absolutely follow the government guidelines, stay at home unless it's absolutely necessary, and if we do go out, and if we do need to shop, which is for those essential items, that we maintain that life-saving social distance with other people that we may see when we go out, and be considerate of others, and particularly respectful of the staff that are working in these businesses, whether it's in the food businesses or in the other categories that I've mentioned.
Good advice, Helen.
They are working absolutely round the clock to make sure that we continue to have access to what we need. So I think it's a real joint effort between those people working in the industry and us all as members of the public.
Helen Dickens, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid, but Helen Dickens of the British Retail Consortium, thank you.
It's 9 minutes to 7. That message, stay at home and save lives. For those in abusive or violent relationships where the fear is for their own safety or that of children in the home, it is a very difficult message indeed. Nicole Jacobs is the Domestic Violence Commissioner. Good morning.
Good morning.
What would your advice be to people who are in that position at home this morning in the face of these new restrictions?
I think we have to really wake up to the fact that for so many people, home is not a safe environment. We have prevalence rates of 2 million people subject to domestic abuse just last year, and 2 women are dying a week because of domestic abuse. So when you add those two things together, that with the increased isolation, we have a serious problem on our hands. And so thank you for covering this and allowing us to reach out to people and let people know that there is help available.
Remote help, or are there still shelters that will be open, refuges?
There are. I was on a call yesterday, really impressed with the networks of services, helplines, refuges, community-based support. They're shifting their patterns of work and doing a lot more work over the phone. But obviously, refuges are still open, and these helplines are going to be critical lifelines for people in coming days. They're not just always for talking over the phone. There are web-based chats. There's a lot of really interesting work happening to allow for a little bit more innovation for people who are going to have trouble reaching out
but we've
in this period of isolation.
From many charities and voluntary organisations about the problems of staffing and volunteers not being able to get to them or offer the services that they would have before.
That's right. So these charities, on the whole, they are charities. They're implementing contingency plans. They're talking to each other daily about how to address these challenges. But I would love for people to understand that these helplines are still there. I think particularly the helplines are a good place to start because they'll have a very good handle on what services are available. So I think we have to encourage and let people know to try to call these helplines. If you can think of a friend or family member that you would be concerned about self-isolating with people who you've known in the past to be abusive, reach out to them, talk to them, encourage them to call. And of course, I am going to tell you that the government needs to do more on this issue.
Support them. Nicole Jacobs,
yes,
thank you very much.
6 minutes to 7. One of the greatest fears of those running the NHS, one of the greatest fears of many people in this country, is that coronavirus will spread into the nation's nursing and care homes, infecting those who are already very vulnerable. That is precisely what has happened in Oakland's nursing home in Hove. 13 of the 20 residents are displaying symptoms. They've had tests and are now waiting anxiously for the results. Amongst them, John Kent's mother. John joins us on the line. Good morning to you.
Morning.
These are anxious days, I assume, as you just wait for that test to come back.
They are. There's absolutely nothing we can do. Obviously, we can't go and see my mother, and no other families can see their residents. And I think it must be awful for the staff too. We've been trying to get a test for over a week now, and they didn't come through until this weekend.
Oh, you saw the symptoms quite some time ago.
We were told that I think my mother might have been one of the early residents to show symptoms. That was at the end of last week, so the weekend before last. Initially it was quite a small number, I gather. And the home was asking for tests and was told that, they weren't a priority. They couldn't get the tests. So they've been grappling with a lack of tests and a lack of equipment for the last week and a half.
And what about the staff who, presumably, if there is a widespread outbreak, they may well themselves be infected?
I think they are. My understanding is that we're getting regular updates from the home, and it must be an awful situation for them. I think some of the staff are showing symptoms themselves. Others have had to isolate because members of their family are ill or showing symptoms or potentially exposed, so they're not allowed to go into work. So it must be absolutely shocking. I can't believe we're in this situation, to be honest.
Your mother, I understand, has dementia, so is she aware of what is happening? It must be particularly distressing if she does, for her and for you, unable really to reach out and help her.
I think she is. I think she is aware. I think most of that shows through being sort of fed up and confused. It's her short-term memory which isn't very good. So I think she'll know that something's not right because the routine's not there, and have enough of an awareness from seeing the news and so on that actually this is going on. It's just not necessarily remembering exactly what it is. But again, I think she's scared, she's fed up, she's not happy and not well.
And you?
Probably similar. It's kind of it's an awful situation to be. It's very terrifying that you can't even go and see somebody like that and try and comfort them. It's really hard. Yes, I think we've had I realise that I understand that the virus is going to spread. We've been talking about this for a few weeks now, and the fact that the equipment hasn't been spread out and it's still in the warehouse in Merseyside or wherever it is, judging by the news last night. I mean, I don't understand it. I think it's absolutely shocking.
Well, best of luck, John, to you and to your mother, to all the residents there at the Oakland Nursing Home in Hove. It's obviously a deeply anxious time for you and for many people in a similar situation. Thank you.
3 minutes to 7 now. Nick Miller has this morning's weather forecast. Nick?
Good morning. Most places across the UK are looking dry today. The best of the sunshine will be in England and Wales. There is, though, a stationary weather front close to northwest Scotland. So here, for some of us, it's looking very wet today. There'll be more rain, and by the time it finally eases tomorrow, some places will have had over 100 millimetres of rain. So there is a risk of flooding in this part of Scotland, and there's a Met Office yellow warning for rain in force. Let's take a look at the detail across the UK, though, starting in southwest England, Wales and northwest England. And today here will be dry. There'll be some hazy sunshine, also some patchy fair weather cloud developing here and there as the day goes on, but further long sunny spells. For southeast England, the Midlands, eastern England and northeast England, a dry day, mostly sunny skies, some high cloud making that sun hazy, especially the further north you are. For Northern Ireland, here mostly cloudy skies, though there's still some hazy sunshine around the further east you are. Across the western side of Northern Ireland, the thicker cloud here may bring a little rain for a few places. For southwest Scotland and eastern Scotland, often cloudy here. Parts of eastern Scotland are seeing some hazy sunshine. Thicker cloud in southwest Scotland may bring a little rain in a few places. And for northern Scotland, here it's cloudy, it's wet, the rain heaviest and most persistent in the Western Isles. It is quite windy in Scotland, some gusts up to 55 miles per hour, especially in the northwest. Temperatures mainly in the range of 11 to 15 degrees Celsius across the UK today, but as high as 17 in the warmer parts of Wales and western England.
Nick, thank you very much. Now, Mark Commode is warming up his projector.
on BBC 4.
How was British history turned into Hollywood gold? Why are supervillains the new superstars? And what gave female spies their license to kill?
Mark Kermode's Secrets of Cinema.
Join me in a new series as I explore the movie genres we love and reveal the traits and techniques that keep us coming back for more.
Continuing with British history on Thursday night at 9 on BBC 4 and iPlayer.
Coming up on the programme, what's going to happen to all that food that was destined for restaurants and cafes? Well, you might think the answer is simple. It turns out that getting it to us, getting it through the shops, is really rather complicated. We'll hear from the mayors of London and of Birmingham about how this lockdown will operate in their cities, and we'll hear from doctors on the front line.
You're listening to Today on BBC Radio 4. It's 7 o'clock on Tuesday, the 24th of March. The headlines this morning. Police are to enforce stringent new restrictions on people's movements announced by Boris Johnson to try to curb the spread of coronavirus. The government's published a list of businesses that can stay open under the new rules. Banks and opticians can keep trading. Hairdressers have to close. And British travellers are struggling to get out of Australia as it closes its borders. The BBC News is read by Neil Sleet.
Sweeping new restrictions on people's movements have come into force around the UK as the government tries to halt the spread of the coronavirus, which has now claimed 335 lives here. Everyone is banned from leaving their homes for most of the time. Only shops which sell the basic necessities or offer vital services can stay open. People can only travel to and from their places of work if they can't work from home. The measures were announced by the Prime Minister in a rare broadcast to the nation from Downing Street last night. Here's Charlotte Gallagher.
Everyone's way of life in the UK must now change for a period of at least 3 weeks. In his televised address, Boris Johnson said the country was facing a moment of national emergency and set out new quarantine rules. People can leave their homes to buy essential supplies like food or medicine, but this should be as infrequently as possible. They can also provide care for a vulnerable person or travel to work if it's absolutely necessary. We're also being told we can go outside to exercise once a day. Public gatherings of more than 2 people are banned unless it's people we live with. The Prime Minister used wartime language to deliver his message.
In this fight, we can be in no doubt that each and every one of us is directly enlisted. Each and every one of us is now obliged to join together to halt the spread of this disease, to protect our NHS and to save many, many thousands of lives.
These measures will be reviewed next month and depending on the spread of the virus, they could be relaxed or even toughened. Life in Britain is unrecognisable to what it was just days ago.
The police will be able to impose fines of £30 as they enforce the new rules, but tougher penalties will be introduced if need be. However, the Police Federation, which represents rank and file officers, says enforcement will be difficult, not least in London, where there's reported to be high levels of sickness in the ranks. Our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw reports.
The measures announced by Boris Johnson represent some of the most far-reaching curbs on personal freedom ever introduced in the UK in peacetime. But it's unclear how the rules can be made to work. The first hurdle is to get them onto the statute book. Although the Prime Minister said the restrictions on travel and gatherings would come into effect immediately, the police don't yet have the powers to enforce them. The second issue, assuming regulations are approved, is the practical difficulty of getting groups to disperse and accurately identifying people who shouldn't be on the streets without losing public goodwill and sparking disorder. When efforts to persuade those who don't comply have failed, officers will be able to issue fines, with prosecutions likely to be a last resort. But the Metropolitan Police Federation said it would put officers in a very difficult position. Peter Fahy, the former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, said the measures would work only through peer pressure and community support by making people understand that such action would save lives.
Late last night, the government published a list of shops and businesses that can remain open. Car showrooms, libraries, auction houses, beauty salons and caravan parks have all been told to shut. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports.
From today, only shops selling essential goods and services will stay open. They include supermarkets and pharmacies, health shops, post offices, newsagents and banks. Hair salons won't be included. But Sports Direct has told staff in an email that its stores will remain open where possible, saying it was well placed to keep the UK as fit and healthy as possible. There will be particular challenges for the supermarkets, already working flat out to keep up with demand. Waitrose says it will now begin to limit the number of customers allowed in at any one time, so that social distancing can be observed. And when the shop is at capacity...
The Italian region of Lombardy has banned outdoor exercise, while the Spanish police are imposing fines of around €600. Labour says it supports the action taken by the Prime Minister, but wants more clarity about them. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake reports.
An address to the nation at a time of crisis. Boris Johnson's statement in Downing Street marked a significant stepping up of the government's attempt to slow the spread of coronavirus. No Prime Minister wants to enact measures like this, Mr Johnson said, but after widespread evidence that government guidance was not being followed and political pressure, he issued a clear instruction for people to stay at home. The government is not triggering the Civil Contingencies Act, designed for the most serious emergencies. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn said the stricter measures were the right response, but called again for better protection for self-employed workers. The Liberal Democrats also welcomed the new restrictions. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said the stringent curbs on people's lives amounted to a lockdown, which was necessary to slow the spread of the virus and ease pressure on the NHS.
Officials in China have announced that the complete lockdown in the city of Wuhan, where the global coronavirus outbreak began, will be partially lifted next month. Restrictions will be eased from the 8th of April. Robin Brandt reports from Shanghai.
Wuhan has been shut off from the rest of the world since the middle of January, a complete lockdown. But officials now say that will change on the 8th of April, when anyone who has a green code on a widely used health phone app will be allowed to leave the city. For almost a week, there were no new confirmed cases of coronavirus in Wuhan, but that changed today when one single case was revealed. It comes after health officials there confirmed that they were not counting cases of people who were positive but weren't being hospitalized, or those who didn't show any symptoms of COVID-19. China's main concern now is imported cases from abroad. They account for 74 of the latest 78.
British travellers are struggling to get home from Australia as the country closes its borders because of the virus. Most flights back to the UK are either fully booked or have been cancelled, and the cost of the remaining tickets is rising fast. Shaima Khalil reports from Sydney.
Britons are being urged to return to the UK immediately while commercial travel is still an option. But for many stuck in New Zealand and here in Australia, this is proving very difficult. The BBC has spoken to a number of stranded travellers. Some of them health workers who said they want to get back home to help out. Others have older relatives who they want to be near. There are also young travellers on working holiday visas who are losing their casual jobs and worry about being stuck with no money and no support. The advice from the British Embassy here is for people to get on a plane and get out, or stay put and wait. But with flight cancellations, no refunds, and available tickets costing thousands of pounds, many here feel they're running out of options.
In other news, the US government has said it will cut aid to Afghanistan by $1 billion this year. The decision was announced by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo after a failed trip to Kabul to try to rescue a US peace agreement with the Taliban. He's criticised President Ashraf Ghani and his rival Abdullah for failing to end their feud, which is threatening the deal. Scientists in Washington have identified a primordial creature which they say was the forerunner to most animals living today, including people. The worm-like organism was smaller than a grain of rice and burrowed on the sea floor more than 500 million years ago. Fossils of the creature have been found in South Australia.
Thank you, Neil. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 7. In years to come, we'll all still be telling our children and our grandchildren how we felt the night we were told to stay at home unless we had to leave, to close businesses unless they had to stay open. The day when the country, in the words of this morning's newspaper headlines, was placed under house arrest and became lockdown Britain. The truth is, of course, a little more nuanced than that. Up and down the land, people awake this morning facing choices about what they can and cannot, should and should not do as they seek to make sense of the official advice. In a moment, we'll talk to the man who is Mayor of the West Midlands. First, our correspondent Duncan Kennedy went onto the streets in Southampton to find out what people there thought of the new restrictions.
Shirley High Street. It could be any high street. This area near the centre of Southampton appeared in the Doomsday Book. Now history has given way to modernity and reality.
We'll see within a month what consequences are. It's definitely it's a hard time.
Shazad and his brother run a mobile phone business here. Just the type of shop Boris Johnson says should now close.
It's like kind of family business, so it will be very hard. To be honest, even it's hard now to like run a business these days. If it is complete lockdown, it will be very hard like that.
At Razors a few doors down, hair was being cut, coiffed and clipped. But Joseph the boss says he accepts non-essential shops like his will now have to hang up their scissors and put the virus before vanity.
It's going to be better to shut down. It's like all the hairdresser and all the barber shop. It's going to be so much better, you know.
That means you won't have a job.
I know, yeah, but it's going to be like better for people, you know.
We will immediately close all shops selling non-essential goods.
Some people here listen to the Prime Minister in their cars.
We will beat the coronavirus, and we will beat it together.
Others were busy jogging down the high street, including Amber Mossbirch, a 14-year-old boxer who won gold at the European Championships. She and her dad Adam have already seen their gym close and feel the new restrictions will make outdoor life seem alien, even guilt-inducing.
It'll make it difficult to train, but I think it'll be for good reasons.
She loves boxing, we love training, but if you're going to save someone's life, then what do, you know? It's this madness of the world right now, it's just, no one really knows.
Not far away, Claire Wright creates embroidered t-shirts at her business, the Thread Studio. But with no shops or other outlets to sell to, her 8-year-old venture is slowly unravelling too.
We're not an essential business in, the grand scheme of things. We basically tried to get as many of our orders as we could out last week, which we did. There are 5 really small orders to be done. Now, with the lockdown, our suppliers won't be able to supply us the stuff.
The Prime Minister spoke of using the police to enforce the new measures, to compel us to comply. Hampshire's Police and Crime Commissioner Michael Lane says he hopes the British public won't need that.
It's absolutely key the public behaves the best it can first. That will help us all, including those individuals.
And do you think the police might have to make some examples to ensure that the public do behave like that?
Do you know, that's not where I would wish it to first go, but if they need to, the police will step up.
Stepping up by shutting down as Britain moves indoors.
Duncan Kennedy reporting. Listening to that, Andy Street, Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Nick.
As you, I imagine, along with everybody else, are asking questions this morning, what exactly does this advice mean? Are you clear enough about who should and should not go to work this morning, about which shops should and should not open?
I think we're pretty clear, yes. So if you take the shop question first of all, the list is very precise actually, so I think that is pretty clear cut.
Just to be clear, not, sorry to interrupt, but not Sports Direct, who've said they are staying open.
They shouldn't be staying open is my read of the list, and I don't think many people listening to your programme will think they're running an essential service. It's more difficult in some jobs, obviously. The most clear-cut definition of key workers, we had to work through this on Friday in terms of who would be provided with education for children, so I think that's pretty clear. But where but there are some grey areas. Of course there are, Nick, and this will have to work through in the next few days. So everyone understands that production and distribution of food is important, but how far up the supply chain do you go for that? So yeah, there'll be some things to work through, and I'm sure we'll do that sensibly.
Another example that fellow Mayor Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has raised is construction workers. He's suggesting that on non-essential sites they should stay at home and not go to work.
I suspect that will be the case as well. But yeah, that is an area that hasn't been a firm judgment yet.
Now, unlike the Mayor of London, you don't have direct responsibility for the police, but you've got an overview of all that is happening in your region. Are you expecting the police to enforce this now, or do you think it's going to be council workers who are going out and reminding people what their duties and responsibilities are?
Actually, neither of those. I would hope that the public would enforce it themselves. And I think actually what happened last night was a sort of moment where the nation very much said, right, we've understood this now. So it would be really sad if the answer to this was enforcement. In terms of the police, I think they will, I've had a brief exchange with the Chief Constable this morning. I think they will be working through their role, and indeed throughout the last couple of weeks. They have very much been in the background in all of our planning, but I really would not want to get to a position where they have to play the front line role.
Don't want it, but we've seen some pretty extraordinary scenes in shops, haven't we? I think in Tesco's in Dudley recently, the queues were described, well, not queues, it was described as mob rule.
Yeah, it was indeed, but I stand by what I say. This is not a moment where we expect police to have to enforce. I think the sensible public judgments will come through, but they'll certainly be there in the background, as they have been in all the contingency planning.
Now, you will know, in a city like Birmingham and the other cities of the West Midlands, cities and towns as well, the people who will be most worried are those people who are running small businesses, maybe one or two per people businesses, just wondering, how do we get food on the table? Are you still pressurising the government to get more help for them?
Yes is the one-word answer. I mean, I think the first thing we should say is the government have moved incredibly fast, haven't they? So it was the beginning of last week we were told about the business loans, and talking to HSBC yesterday, that money is already flowing. So it's good that quickly that's been dealt with. And obviously last Thursday we had the news about supporting pay. And again, lots of people in the hospitality industry have said to me, I don't now have to make people redundant. But there is another part of our economy that is still waiting for support, and that of course is the self-employed sector. And let's remember that's been an incredibly successful part of the economy over the last decade. So yes, I do think we still have to turn to that.
And is there a specific that you want to put on the Chancellor's desk, exactly what you want him to do for the self-employed?
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it, as to how to do it. So when the Chancellor was talking about main employed people last week, he was talking about using the tax system, because there has to be a simple way of actually doing this. So I think you will need to come to the self-employment tax, and that probably in that case means some sort of rebate rather than an arrangement through a PAYE, which of course is payment in time.
Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands, thanks for joining us.
17 minutes past 7. It will take at least 2 weeks to know if these new restrictions achieve their aim of sufficiently bringing down the number of cases of the virus the NHS is dealing with and prevent it being overwhelmed. The objective behind both the First Minister of Scotland and the Prime Minister's words last night.
Day by day, we are strengthening our amazing NHS with 7,500 former clinicians now coming back to the service. With the time you buy, by simply staying at home, we are increasing our stocks of equipment. We are accelerating our search for treatments. We're pioneering work on a vaccine. And we are buying millions of testing kits that will enable us to turn the tide on this invisible killer.
Let me be blunt. The stringent restrictions on our normal day-to-day lives that I'm about to set out are difficult and they are unprecedented. They amount effectively to what has been described as a lockdown. These measures are essential to slow down the spread of this virus. They are essential to reduce the peak impact of it. They are essential to prevent our National Health Service being overwhelmed so that it can continue to provide treatment to all of those who need it.
Well, London is the place in the UK worst affected by the virus. Katie Sanderson is a junior doctor in acute medicine at a London hospital.
The situation is evolving incredibly rapidly. Last week, our A&E completely transformed and is now seeing large numbers of patients come in each day with coronavirus. And I'm having conversations with patients and with families of patients who are going to die, asking whether they want to die in hospital where we're currently not able to have visitors, or whether they want to die at home. They're conversations that even last week I cannot have imagined having. Even if this is not the situation in hospitals outside London yet, things are going to evolve incredibly rapidly there. And what I would like to say is, don't think about hospital bed numbers, intensive care capacity today. Think about where we will be tomorrow, the day after, next week.
What has the effect of all of this been like on you? Because your description makes me understand very clearly why we've had those direct appeals from NHS staff in last few days, in letters, in videos where they looked directly at the camera and they told people already to stay at home.
I love my job. I want to spend the rest of my working life working in palliative care, looking after people who are dying. Healthcare workers have chosen to devote their working lives to looking after the sick and the dying. We will look after your relatives with compassion. We will look after your relatives with care and love. But I do not want to be overwhelmed by tears in a loo at work because somebody sends me a picture today of people queuing unsafely. This is going to be hard enough as it is. What we need you to do is to make sure that every person in this country sits down this morning before they leave their house, reads the guidance, stops and thinks about it and how you will interpret it, and behaves as safely as possible. We have had preventable transmission of this deadly infection over the weekend and yesterday. What I want every single person in this country to think this morning, how we can have not a single further preventable death or preventable transmission of this infection. And that doesn't involve waiting for further clarification of the guidance. Somebody cannot tell you what to do every second of the day.
Do you think the government has been strict enough in what they have now put in place?
I don't think it matters. This is not a time for recrimination or criticism of government policy. I'm sure the time will come when our response to this problem will be dissected. I want to join my voice with the voice of Boris Johnson, which is not something I ever thought I would say, and say, please don't think about the mistakes we've made. Please start the clock again. It's the 24th of March. We can make sure that there is not a single further preventable death. That could be your mother, it could be you. There are healthcare professionals in intensive care now who are my age. I am 32. Please, 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 don't spend your time talking today about mistakes that may have been made. Just think about what you can do to save lives.
Katie Sanderson, thank you, not just for talking to us today, but for what you do.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we'll be hearing from the NHS Providers Organisation at 7:30.
It is now 22 minutes past 7. Many businesses are, of course, struggling to stay afloat in the current crisis. A big rent payment is due for many tomorrow. Might some of them choose just not to pay it? Dom?
Yes, well, rent for the quarter, Nick, as you say, is in most commercial leases paid tomorrow. Many restaurants in particular are unlikely to pay. The government has said they won't be kicked out if they don't pay. Alistair Murdoch is Chief Executive of Burger King UK. Good morning, Mr. Murdoch. Are you planning to pay your rent tomorrow?
Dominic, good morning to you. No, we're not intending to pay our rent tomorrow.
And I assume all your restaurants are closed?
Yes, we took the decision last night after what the Prime Minister said to close all of our restaurants. If there are any trailing on, they will all be closed this morning, but we closed 500 last night.
What's your understanding of the situation then? The government has said there'll be a moratorium on commercial leases so that you won't lose them, you won't be kicked out. Can they enforce that? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yes, I do think it's going to happen. I do think largely most landlords as well have been reasonable about this. I do think there are a number of creative solutions as well. We could add 3 months on to the end of the lease for those people who are unable necessarily to pay in the short term at the end of these 3 months. I think it will stay under review as well. So I think it's a very, very positive move, and particularly for small independents where the risk lay in the lease forfeiture, I think it's a very positive step.
So you've closed your 500 restaurants overnight. What happens to the staff who were employed there?
the staff, just like anyone else, we think it's socially the right thing to do in order to look after their health and their well-being. They have all been told to go home and just do like we are all doing now, from home. So, the safety of our teams and everyone, actually, frankly, is our primary concern at this time.
And you'll be able to pay them, at least that there is that government guarantee for 80% of wages for directly employed staff?
Yes, again, the furlough scheme, as it's called, we're not entirely sure of the exact rules and regulations, but that's not a criticism. It's just because the situation is evolving so fast. We think we will have to be able to try and support those at least until the end of April, until the money can flow back, or we understand exactly how it happens. But yes, we will be supporting those staff until the furlough scheme kicks in.
And briefly, Alistair, if that's all right, are you thinking of applying for any of the government-assisted loan schemes? So there are two main ones. Do you think you'll qualify for either?
At this stage, we don't think we'll apply for either. I do again think for smaller businesses that those loans look quite attractive, but we don't think we'll apply for either of those. What I would say though, is that our banks and our stakeholders, our owners as well, have been very supportive, and we just had a call yesterday from our bank saying, talk to us, we're open. So we would expect that something might come out of that. Can't guarantee it, but we would expect something might. But we will need something. After 2 or 3 months, we will definitely need something.
Thank you very much. Alistair Murdoch, Chief Executive of Burger King in the UK.
And thank you, Dominic. It's 7:25. Rob's here with the Sports News Morning, Rob.
Good morning to you, Nick. Well, the momentum towards a postponement of the Tokyo Olympics is certainly gathering pace, with leading IOC member, the Canadian Dick Pound, telling the American newspaper USA Today that the Games certainly won't start on the 24th of July as scheduled, and the likelihood is that they will be postponed for a year. This to follow his own country's withdrawal from the Games, as we reported yesterday, a lead followed by Australia. So, where does this leave the British Olympic Association? We can find out now from its chairman, Hugh Robertson. Good morning to you. You've been speaking with leading British sports administrators, I understand. It seems you're also moving towards withdrawal.
Yes, we're pretty much there, Rob. I think a postponement is absolutely inevitable. The final piece of the jigsaw is that we've got a telephone call this afternoon with UK Sport, the British Paralympic Association, our sports and the athlete representatives, just absolutely to nail this down. And then I suspect, as you correctly say, we'll be joining others around the world in calling for postponement.
That's presumably only in the event of the IOC pressing ahead with a start in July of this year, or does it extend beyond that?
I really don't see that there's any way that the IOC can press ahead with a start in July of this year. We've always said that there were two things that for us were really important here. The first was preserving the competitive integrity of the Olympic Games. When the country's effectively in lockdown, when athletes can't train, when I regret to say some of them may catch the coronavirus, there's no way you can preserve that competitive integrity. And secondly, I think there's a really serious question about whether it will be appropriate to hold an Olympic Games against this backdrop. So for both those reasons, maybe it's my personal view that July is a complete non-starter, but I think we just need to do that final bit of the consultation.
And you think a postponement probably as long as a year to July 2021?
I think I'm less certain about the timescales involved, Rob. The danger, of course, if you put it off until the autumn, would be that if this takes longer to clear through, I mean, let's all hope that it doesn't, but it's perfectly possible it will, then you might end up with a second postponement, and I think the IOC and the Olympic movement would look pretty silly at that point.
Yes. I suppose in a way you, the Canadians and Australia, and who knows who else might join a withdrawal, you're making the IOC president's decision for him. A Games without leading Olympic countries simply wouldn't be a Games.
That's absolutely right, and if you apply our sort of competitive integrity test, yes, absolutely, an Olympic Games without many of the leading nations around the world wouldn't be the right sort of Olympic Games. But I mean, I don't think you should just see this as a sort of American, Canadian, British, Australian and New Zealand problem. If you're a French athlete at the moment, if you're a German athlete at the moment, an Italian or a Spanish, there is absolutely no way you can train whilst your country is in lockdown. I mean, it's just impossible. You've got a vague chance of keeping a a small level of fitness if you're an individual athlete. If you're training as part of a rowing 8 or a hockey team or something like this, you have no chance at all because you need to train with other athletes. So it's not. We shouldn't just see this as a problem, for us the Canadians, the United States, Australians, and the New Zealanders.
Hugh Robertson, Chairman of the British Olympic Association, thank you very much. And along with so much else at the moment, the racing tips have been suspended. It just doesn't feel right.
Rob, thank you. There is still a new comedy show coming up this week, though, on Radio 4.
How do you react when up close and personal with some criminal behaviour?
Tango Bravo 03, can you attend Scunthorpe Police Station?
I'm here to offer professional guidance as an experienced Humberside police sergeant. I've not really prepared anything for today's show, but that's all right, I know how to ad-lib. I've given evidence at police discipline hearings. It's a Radio 4 show where you, the audience, are sworn in as cops to face real policing dilemmas. And what do you think that law may be?
GDPR?
GDPR? It's a Fair Cop with me, Alfie Moore, on BBC Radio 4. I understand why you're asking. It seems to cover almost everything else.
Starts on Friday morning at 11:30.
Quick look at the weather now. A milder day overall. England and Wales will be dry with hazy sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland will be mostly cloudy and windy.
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Nick Robinson, Michelle Hussein and Neil Sleet with a summary of the news.
Police have been told they can break up public gatherings and impose fines if people break stringent new rules on public movement, which have come into force to curb the coronavirus outbreak. The Prime Minister has told people they must remain in their homes, except for journeys to buy food and medicine. They're also permitted to venture out for brief exercise or to go to and from work if it can't be done at home. Public meetings in groups of more than 2 are not permitted. Legislation is being introduced to give police powers to enforce the rules and is expected to be enacted later this week. The Metropolitan Police Federation, whose members work in London, has expressed concern about the measures. It says sickness among officers in the capital will pose serious challenges. Boris Johnson also said all shops selling non-essential goods and services must close. Those allowed to stay open include supermarkets, newsagents and pharmacies, as well as banks and post offices. Clothing and electronic stores are among those being told to close. The measures will be in effect for at least 3 weeks. We'll also see the closure of libraries, playgrounds and outdoor gyms and places of worship. But the owner of Sports Direct, Mike Ashley, has told his staff that they will keep trading. He said selling sporting equipment was important to the well-being of the public. Labour said he should take some responsibility and shut down his businesses. Officials in China have announced that the lockdown in Wuhan, the city where the global outbreak began, will be lifted for healthy people on the 8th of April. The authorities have reported a new case of coronavirus in Wuhan, ending a 5-day run of no new cases in the city. Myanmar has reported its first confirmed cases of coronavirus infections, both local men who arrived recently from abroad. It had been the last Southeast Asian country, apart from sparsely populated Laos, to remain officially free of the virus, despite sharing a long border with China.
The time is 28 minutes to 8. The way ahead is hard and many lives will sadly be lost, the Prime Minister told us last night, and we've had an urgent call earlier on the programme from a doctor asking everyone to stop and think hard before they leave their home this morning, aiming to have no new infections as of today because of the new restrictions that have been put in place. Chris Hobson, Chief Executive of NHS Providers, whose members include hospital trusts, mental health, community and ambulance services, is on the line. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Michelle.
And I know you heard that interview with Dr. Katie Sanderson. Her point is that there isn't a policeman outside people's door. It's an appeal to the general public to think hard about what the government's put forward.
Yes, and I thought Kate was really clear that if we want to support NHS staff, then we all have a
Chris,
to do last night.
Unfortunately, the line isn't great to you. We're going to we're going to come back to you in a moment. I just want to bring in one other piece of news before we did that, because there is still concern for those who work in the NHS and social care about equipment to protect them while helping those in need, including support at home. And the government says millions more of these personal protective equipment kits are going out. We're hearing about the army being drafted in to help deliver these kits. And just this morning, Brigadier Phil Proffer, someone who's been overseeing the delivery at St George's Hospital in London, was recorded saying this.
My normal role is to deliver combat supplies to combat forces in time of war. But we can respond to these challenges, and it's great to be stood side by side with our NHS colleagues as we preserve their force and get ready for the challenges ahead.
Dr. Phil Proffer at St George's Hospital this morning, where they've had this delivery of personal protection equipment. Chris Hobson, are you back with us?
I am, yes.
Sorry about the line a bit earlier. You were talking about Dr. Katie Sanderson's call.
Yes, I thought Katie was incredibly articulate and moving, actually, in terms of what she was asking each of us to do. And if we want to support NHS staff, and our chief executives have been incredibly struck by a real outpouring of kind of help and support, flowers, gifts, etc. But actually each of us can make a fantastic contribution to support the NHS by just doing what the Prime Minister asked us to do last night, and to think really carefully about what each of us does today and over the next 3 weeks. And we can support the NHS the best by doing what he's asked us to do.
Do you think it is still possible to avoid the NHS being overwhelmed?
Well, the thing that's incredibly striking, Michelle, is how much is being done, how quickly to prepare for this. And when we talk to our chief executives, as we do the whole time, the amount of work that is going on to reconfigure services, reallocate staff, discharge medically fit patients, expand critical care capacity, postpone elective surgery, add private sector hospitals, expand ventilation support, bring back retired members of staff. The NHS has never done so much to prepare in such a short period of time. And I think we've got two crucial advantages compared to many other nations. The first is we've had 3 or 4 weeks to prepare in a way that, for example, they didn't have in Lombardy. And secondly, the crucial point, the key is in the word national. We have a national health service, which effectively means that we've got capacity for hospitals and community and mental health and ambulance trusts to help each other, but also we've got a really clear command and control structure, and we're really used to using that structure when we have emergencies. So nobody can answer the question at this point about whether we will be overwhelmed, but it's very clear that the NHS, because it's a national health service, is probably in the best or one of the best positions in the world to deal with this explosion in demand that we know we're going to have. And I thought, again, what you could tell from Katie's voice is that when we talk to our chief executives, the vast majority of them are kind of preparing, but it's now clear that from our London chief executives that actually we are now, and this is now upon us in London, and we are having to ask, as you heard from Katie, our frontline staff to step up and do the incredible job that we know they will.
On this point about personal protection equipment, there is concern that supply chains have broken down, and that's been a concern not just for NHS but also for people who work in social care. Our reporter Charlotte Hayward has the story of one man's experience in the last few days.
We're their friends, we're their support. In every part of their life, we're involved in every part of their life.
Mark Abrahams is a support worker in London. He's been working with vulnerable adults for nearly a decade. He earns £10.50 an hour.
It's not just, go to there, do to the bank, do a bit of shopping and everything. It's more, it's psychological as well. We're not counted in the equation.
At the weekend, one of the people that he cares for became ill.
One of the guys had problems coughing. He's been coughing for the last 3 or 4 days, and the advice that I was given was to phone 111, which I didn't get through to because we stayed on the phone and never got no answer.
Mark followed protocol and called 999. The paramedics came out.
Everything's okay, but he is borderline COVID.
Despite having all the symptoms, Mark was left in the dark as to whether the patient did have COVID-19 because no test was done. But the paramedics did impress upon Mark that when he went home to his family, he needed to make sure he put his clothes in a boil wash and wash his hands. At the moment, at work, Mark's got no personal protective equipment.
We haven't had face masks, we've run out of gloves, aprons. Well, we found some old, really old aprons.
He tried to see if the local hospital had any equipment that they could use.
And when I phoned them, they explained to me that they haven't got these things to offer. Aprons, face masks, they're low on those things themselves, so they wouldn't be able to help in that way.
So how are you going to protect yourself and the people that you look after?
The best way we can. It's our job, isn't it? We just got to do what we have to do. If the worst happens, what can we do?
What is the worst that happens?
For me, I've got people in my family who are underlying illnesses, so I've got to just make sure I do everything that I have to do to make sure that they're safe and maintain my working philosophy of working with the guys the best way I can.
According to the charity Skills for Care, there are around 685,000 jobs caring for people in their homes in England, working in a range of private companies, charities and for local authorities. Mark works for the 3 Cs. Jo Clare is his boss.
3C stands for Control and Choice in the Community. We're a social care and social inclusion charity. There is some kind of blockage in distribution of this first set of face masks that is meant to tide us over. And unfortunately, we're now in the territory of having to deal with probable infection without any protection for our staff.
If someone like Mark gets ill, he's not going to be easy to replace.
Have 16 members of staff so far self-isolating. There are hundreds of organisations in this position, all trying to get replacement staff. There's a very limited stock of agency staff.
Vic Rayner is the Executive Director of the National Care Forum, which supports care providers across the UK. And one of the ways in which she thinks the government could help the care sector is by increasing testing for those in the system.
There are large challenges to the workforce, and one of the ways in which some of that could be addressed by having regular and available testing for staff, so that those who are in self-isolation, for example, can be tested to see if they can return to work. The other is around the testing of people who are leaving hospital. That testing would enable the care sector to be able to provide the right care at the right time and provide it in a way that enables those individuals to be safe and all those who are either providing the care or support or living alongside them.
If Mark had either a test or the protective personal equipment that he needs, he'd know it was safe for him to go into work, something he wants to do.
I've got to come to work. I've got to do that. Not just money-wise, it's not about the money. It's when you're doing care, you're not looking into that. You're just going to do what you have to do.
That report from Charlotte Hayward, and Chris Hobson is still on the line. Do people who work for the organisations you represent in the community in mental health and ambulance services have the right level of PPE?
So nothing could be more important than ensuring that the staff on who we're going to rely so heavily over the next few weeks have got the right protective equipment. I think it's well known that we have had distribution problems. The key issue is that we're told by national leaders that there are sufficient national stocks, but what happened is we went from a system where our trusts were organising, were ordering relatively small, stable, predictable amounts of personal protection equipment to suddenly going to wanting huge amounts of it at very short notice. So we've had to completely overhaul the distribution network. You heard from the earlier clip that we've now got the Army involved, and what's striking for us is that over the last 24 hours the number of chief executives who've been saying they have problems has diminished, but there's absolutely no doubt that we need to ensure that improvement trajectory continues.
Chris Hobson, I'm sorry to stop you there, but we're out of time. Thank you very much for talking to us. Chief Executive of NHS Providers.
It is now 18 minutes past 8, or to 8, I'm sorry. 18 minutes to 8. If you are going to work, you don't want to be rushed by half an hour. Time to look at today's papers and news websites. The Mirror says Boris Johnson has hung a close sign on the door of the country. PM clicks the lock is one of the paper's headlines. Nation confined to the House as Johnson takes the ultimate step, the Telegraph says. Harry Deeds in the Mail notes that the Prime Minister spoke in front of a pair of drooping Union flags, which somehow felt, he said, oddly inappropriate. Seldom them had a moment felt so profoundly un-British.
The Times says that as an instinctive Liberal Conservative, this decision is clearly one the Prime Minister had hoped to avoid. But it adds his hand was forced by the speed with which the pandemic is spreading. For the Express, the gentle touch was not working. Tougher measures were badly needed. The Eye says that dithering, mixed messages and catastrophic mass ignorance had become more dangerous by the day. In The Guardian's view, the crowds who gathered in public parks on Mother's Day weekend were in part a testament to confused messaging about going outdoors.
For some, the instruction to stay at home came too late. Should the emergency have been imposed earlier, the Mirror asks. The Sun thinks Mr Johnson has been too slow to react, too reluctant to think the unthinkable, too afraid to take the draconian action that other world leaders did.
But the HuffPost UK website says his sombre tone was welcome and overdue. Finally, the Mail says this places the PM firmly on the front foot. People were crying out for confidence, clarity, consistency and authority. After its sharp criticism of Mr Johnson yesterday, today the Times thinks he has shown the firm leadership the country needs and implemented it judiciously.
It is now 16 minutes to 8. We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself, Donald Trump says, and he's spoken of reopening the economy in weeks and not months. It's a sign of a growing tension in the White House between medical experts on the one hand and those political advisors whose calculation has long been that the path to re-election for Trump is through a booming stock market and low unemployment. As our North America editor, John Soap, now reports.
A tale of two tweets, each the president posted on Sunday night, and each in their own way emblematic of Donald Trump and his response to this crisis. Let's deal with the most significant first. It said, "We cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. At the end of the 15-day period, we'll make a decision as to which way we want to go." A point he expanded on at his daily briefing last night.
At some point we're going to open up our country and it's going to be fairly soon.
Weeks or months?
I'm not looking at months, I can tell you right now.
In other words, lift restrictions as soon as possible. Donald Trump's messaging has on occasions been erratic, and sometimes what the president has said has been starkly at odds with what his experts have recommended. These are just a few of the things he said that either the Vice President or the White House Coronavirus Task Force have had to correct.
So far, we have lost nobody to coronavirus in the United States. This is their new hoax. You have to be calm. It'll go away. What a problem. Came out of nowhere.
Almost everybody that we see is getting better.
We think it's going to have a very good ending for us. Anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the tests. And the tests are beautiful.
But the policy, critically, until now, has followed doctors' orders. Social separation, self-quarantining, ramping up testing. And responding as the leader of a nation at war with this hidden enemy.
For those of you who are feeling alone and isolated, I want you to know that we are all joined together as one people, eternally linked by our shared national spirit. We love our country. No American is alone as long as we are united, and we are united. We're very united.
Though there are occasions when the mask slips. This was the president's reaction on Sunday night when he was told in the briefing room that Mitt Romney, the only Republican senator to vote for Donald Trump's impeachment, was self-isolating for fears of coronavirus.
Romney's in isolation?
Yes.
Gee, that's too bad. Go ahead.
Is that sarcasm there?
No, sir. No whatsoever.
But this emerging policy of lifting the shutters on the US economy is a sign that the president wants to break with his public health professionals and go with his gut. Why? Well, because the president's whole re-election strategy for November was built on going to the country with a stock market soaring and unemployment at a record low.
Our economy is the envy of the world. Perhaps the greatest economy we've had in the history of our country. And as long as you keep this team in place, our future has never, ever looked brighter or sharper.
Except COVID-19 is likely to result in the exact opposite. Record highs for joblessness, the stock market in a slump, and the US economy in the toilet. A far cry from the Keep America Great playbook. And there are many business leaders who similarly feel that the remedy is worse than the disease, that an economy is being sacrificed for a small percentage of very vulnerable people. And many of those voices have the president's ear. If he does change course, which he seems determined to do, and say to people infected with coronavirus, it's okay for you to return to work providing you wear a mask, it would be a life and death gamble, potentially many lives and many deaths. If he doesn't, then he's going to have to go to the country